My name is Myra Hayes. For 65 years, that name has been a vessel for various identities: a daughter, a student of history with a mind once bright with forgotten dates and royal lineages, a wife, and for 38 of those years, a mother. The identity of wife was recently and unceremoniously stripped from me, leaving the others to rattle around in the empty space it left behind. The divorce from Richard had been less a severing and more an erosion, a slow, grinding process that left me feeling worn down to nothing. And so, the identity of mother became my primary shelter. The guest room at my son Ethan's house, however, was not the sanctuary I had imagined. It was a space of cool, minimalist design, all shades of gray and chrome, curated by my daughter-in-law, Claire. It felt less like a room and more like a showroom, a place where no personal object could ever truly belong. My 2 suitcases stood in the corner like silent, reproachful monuments to a life that no longer fit anywhere. For 3 weeks, I had learned the quiet rhythms of their home in Port Blossom. The whisper of the espresso machine at 6:05 a.m. The scent of Claire's expensive citrus and cedarwood body wash that lingered in the hallway. The specific, hollow click of Ethan's dress shoes on the polished concrete floors as he left for his job in finance. I had learned the unspoken rules: to wash my single coffee mug and plate immediately, to fold the cashmere throw on the armchair just so, to make my bed with the precision of a hotel maid, leaving no trace of my restless nights on the crisp, white linens. I was a ghost haunting the edges of their meticulously crafted life, a problem they discussed in hushed tones behind their bedroom door after they thought I'd fallen asleep. The morning light, a pale, watery gray typical of the Pacific Northwest coast, filtered through the floor-to-ceiling window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the still air. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped in my lap, waiting for the sound of the shower to stop. That was my cue. I had a 15-minute window to use the bathroom before Claire began her own extensive morning ritual. It wasn't a rule that was ever spoken, but one I had learned from the slight, impatient tapping of her fingers on the doorframe on my 3rd day here. "Myra, you're up," Claire said, her voice smooth and polished as the quartz countertops in her kitchen. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe the color of a stormy sea, her blonde hair already twisted into a perfect, low bun. She never called me Mom. In her mouth, my name was a formal, distancing thing. "Good morning, dear," I said, forcing a warmth I didn't feel. I was just about to make some tea. She moved past me into the kitchen, her presence filling the space with an energy that felt both effortless and demanding. "Ethan and I were talking last night," she began, pulling a carton of almond milk from the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator. "We're a bit concerned." Concern was a word Claire used when she meant she was annoyed. Ethan appeared then, nodding a slate gray tie that perfectly matched his suit. At 38, he had my thoughtful eyes, but his father's pragmatic, unyielding jawline. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing Claire's temple before pouring himself a coffee from the machine I wasn't to touch. It was a wedding gift, Claire had explained once, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We think it's time to start looking at more sustainable living arrangements for you," Ethan continued, picking up Claire's thread seamlessly. They often spoke like this, a well-rehearsed duet. The hot water I was pouring over a tea bag in my mug suddenly seemed to scald my fingers. Sustainable arrangements? Senior apartments, assisted living. "There are some lovely places just outside the city," Claire offered, blending her protein smoothie. The roar of the machine filled the silence, a convenient way to punctuate a difficult conversation. "Mother just moved into the Willows on Crestview, and it's fabulous. They have a water aerobics class and a book club." Of course, Audrey had. Claire's mother, a woman who had a perfectly good 3-bedroom house, had been set up in a luxury apartment with a view of the marina. Ethan had spent a week helping her move, assembling her new furniture, making sure she was comfortable. My help had consisted of him picking me and my 2 suitcases up from the house Richard now shared with his new, younger wife. "That's different, Mom," Ethan said, reading my expression. "Audrey's situation is, well, it's different." "How so?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "She's a widow. I'm a divorcee. We're both single women of a certain age. The primary difference, it seems, is that her daughter enjoys her company. Claire turned off the blender. The sudden silence was sharp. That's not fair, Myra. This is a 2-bedroom apartment. We have a baby on the way. She was only 3 months along, not yet showing, but the coming baby was a convenient shield for every uncomfortable decision. The guest room I occupied was already being referred to as the nursery. I'm not asking to stay forever, Ethan, I said, turning to my son, my only child. I just need a little more time. The settlement isn't finalized. Richard froze the joint accounts. I need to get back on my feet. Ethan sighed, loosening his tie. It was a nervous gesture he'd had since he was a boy, one of the few tells that revealed the anxiety beneath his polished exterior. Mom, with the baby coming, Claire needs this space to plan, to decorate. The stress isn't good for her. He looked at his wife, a silent promise of protection passing between them. Look, we want to help. But being here, it's not a long-term solution. I see, I said, the words tasting like ash. I looked around the pristine kitchen, at the life my son had built, a life of quiet luxury and carefully managed appearances. A life where I had become an inconvenient, untidy problem. Honestly, Mom, Ethan said, his voice dropping, taking on the patient, slightly condescending tone he used when explaining financial matters to me. You have to take some responsibility for your circumstances. Maybe if you'd focused more on keeping Dad happy, on maintaining the marriage, you wouldn't be in this position. The air left my lungs. The sleek, gray kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. He had taken his father's side, not just in action, but in judgment. He had distilled 39 years of a complex, shared life, of my sacrifices, my support, my love, into a simple, cruel equation of my failure. It was a blow more stunning than any of Richard's infidelities. Thank you for clarifying, I whispered, setting my mug in the sink with a hand that trembled. You've made your position perfectly clear. Myra, I didn't mean, Claire started, but I was already walking away, back to the sterile guest room that had never felt less like a sanctuary. I closed the door and leaned against it, the cool, smooth wood a poor substitute for a spine. Through the door, I heard Claire murmur, she needed to hear it, Ethan. It's tough love. Tough love. It felt a great deal like cruelty. I sat on the bed and stared at my reflection in the dark screen of the television. I saw a woman I barely recognized, her face a roadmap of grief and exhaustion. Ethan's words echoed in my head, not as an insult, but as a verdict. I had been weighed, measured, and found wanting by the one person I thought would always be in my corner. That afternoon, I walked. I left the apartment and walked for hours, with no destination in mind. The salty air from the nearby Puget Sound was cold and sharp against my face. I walked past charming boutiques and artisanal coffee shops, past young families pushing strollers, all part of a world that felt alien to me. My wanderings eventually led me to a small corner store, the kind with a faded awning and a bell that jingled when you opened the door. I bought a bottle of water and a granola bar, my meager dinner. As I paid, my eyes fell on the lottery display. A sign, written in bright, hopeful colors, announced the evening's jackpot, $5 million. On a whim, born of a despair so deep it felt like recklessness, I used the last $5 bill in my wallet to buy a ticket. The clerk, a kind-faced man with a weary smile, slid the slip of paper across the counter. Good luck, he said. I tucked the ticket into my coat pocket and walked back to the apartment, the small rectangle of paper feeling both foolish and impossibly heavy. That night, I didn't join Ethan and Claire for dinner. I heard them order Thai food, their laughter echoing from the living room. I lay in the dark, the door closed, feigning sleep. Later, long after they had gone to bed, I turned on my small laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. With a strange sense of detachment, I looked up the winning lottery numbers. Powerball 6. My heart stopped. I pulled the ticket from my pocket, my fingers clumsy and numb. I smoothed it out on the pristine white duvet. Powerball 6. Every single number matched. I stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. A wave of dizziness washed over me. It couldn't be real. It was a mistake, a hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion. But the numbers remained steady and unblinking. $5 million. After taxes, maybe 3. Enough to buy a house. Enough to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. Enough to never, ever be a burden to anyone again. A single, hysterical laugh escaped my lips, which I quickly smothered in a pillow. I lay there in the silent, perfect guest room, in the home of the son who believed I had failed at life, and I held a secret that would change everything. Ethan's cruel words from the morning echoed back to me, but now they sounded different. Not like a verdict, but like a release. He had untethered me. He had, in his own careless way, set me free. Tomorrow, I would begin the rest of my life. Tonight, I would let them sleep soundly in their bed, blissfully unaware that the woman they saw as a liability had just become the architect of her own salvation. The question wasn't what I would do with the money. The question was what I would do with the power. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the forgotten stirrings of the history student I once was. A woman who understood that power, in the right hands, could reshape the world. Or, at the very least, my small corner of it. I didn't sleep. The lottery ticket lay on the bedside table, a flimsy piece of paper holding the weight of a new world. I spent the hours before dawn in a state of suspended animation, my mind racing. I was no longer Myra Hayes, the pitiable divorcee. I was a cartographer, sketching out the maps of a future I hadn't dared to imagine 24 hours ago. When the first hint of gray light appeared, I rose and dressed with a newfound sense of purpose. I showered quickly, my movements precise and efficient. When I entered the kitchen, Ethan and Claire were already there, engaged in their morning ritual. "Morning," I said, my voice even and calm. They both looked up surprised. My usual demeanor was one of quiet, apologetic presence. This morning, something was different. "Mom," Ethan said, pausing with his coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Listen, about what I said yesterday, it was out of line." "Was it?" I asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Or was it just the truth as you see it?" "It's better to be honest, Ethan. It clarifies things." He looked uncomfortable, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Claire shot him a look, a silent command to drop the subject. "Myra, I've been looking at some brochures," she said, sliding a glossy pamphlet across the island towards me. "The Willows has an opening. We could go for a tour this weekend." I picked up the brochure. It showed smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard. I smiled, a genuine, private smile. "That's very thoughtful of you, Claire. But I think I'll be making my own arrangements." "Oh." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Have you found something?" "I have some promising leads," I said, making myself a cup of tea with deliberate slowness. "I've decided to go into consulting." Ethan choked on his coffee. "Consulting?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Consulting in what?" "Historical acquisitions," I said, the life forming on my lips with surprising ease. "There's a firm that advises private collectors on estate sales and antique artifacts. My degree in history has finally found a market, it seems. It requires some travel, looking at properties. In fact, I'll be leaving for a few days to look at a potential site." They stared at me, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. I was a 65-year-old woman who hadn't held a paying job in 4 decades. The idea was preposterous, and that's what made it so perfect. "That's wonderful, Mom," Ethan said, the skepticism thick in his voice. "What's the company?" "It's a private equity group." "Very discreet," I replied smoothly. "The best part is, if it works out, the position comes with housing. A caretaker's cottage on one of the estates they're looking to acquire." Relief washed over their faces, so potent it was almost comical. The problem was solving itself. I was not only leaving, but I was doing so under my own steam, in a way that cost them nothing and absolved them of their guilt. "Well, that's just fantastic news," Claire said, her smile finally reaching her eyes. "We're so happy for you, Myra." Truly. I knew she was happy for herself, but I let it pass. "Yes," I said, sipping my tea. "Independence is a wonderful thing." The next 2 weeks were a blur of clandestine activity. I made an appointment at the State Lottery Commission in Olympia. I sat in a sterile office across from a kind, bureaucratic man who explained the payout options. I chose the lump sum, signed the papers with a steady hand, and requested the 90-day anonymity period. Then I began my real work. I didn't hire a financial advisor. I became one. I spent my days at the public library, not the grand, beautiful one downtown, but a small branch in a quiet neighborhood where no one would recognize me. I resurrected the sharp, analytical mind that had once dissected the fall of empires and applied it to real estate listings, tax law, and investment strategies. I was no longer a ghost. I was a general, planning a campaign. I found it on a niche real estate website, a 60-acre property in the rolling foothills of the Cascades, about 2 hours east of Port Blossom. It was called Willow Creek Farm. The listing photos showed a sprawling, slightly neglected farmhouse, a large, sturdy-looking barn, and acres of pasture bordered by a line of weeping willow trees along a creek. The description mentioned it was an estate sale, the heirs anxious to sell quickly. And tucked away in the corner of one photo, almost an afterthought, was a small, simple structure described as the original caretaker's cottage. I drove out to see it in a rental car. The moment I turned onto the long, gravel driveway, a sense of peace settled over me, so profound it felt like coming home. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. The farmhouse was weathered but proud, its bones strong. The barn was magnificent. And the cottage was perfect. Small, basic, with peeling paint and a sagging porch step. It was a place of humility. A place for someone to start over. I made a cash offer, 20% below asking price, with no contingencies and a promise to close in 10 days. They accepted within the hour. I packed my 2 suitcases, leaving the guest room as pristine as I had found it. I wrote a short, simple note and left it on the kitchen island. Dear Ethan and Claire, the consulting opportunity has worked out. I'll be relocating immediately. Thank you for your hospitality. I'll be in touch when I'm settled. Myra. I didn't leave a forwarding address or a phone number. I drove away from the sleek, gray apartment building without a single look back. As Port Blossom disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt the last 39 years of my life fall away, leaving behind a clean, open road. The first few months at Willow Creek were a time of rebirth. I wasn't just restoring a farm, I was rebuilding myself. I hired local contractors to repair the barn roof and update the farmhouse plumbing. I learned the difference between a post-hole digger and an auger. My hands, once soft from a life of domesticity, became calloused and strong. I decided the farm would not be a farm. It would be a sanctuary. A place for discarded animals, the old, the unwanted, the ones with pasts full of neglect. It felt right. I was one of them, after all. My first residents were 3 horses saved from an auction, their ribs showing and their spirits low. Then came a small pack of senior dogs from a kill shelter, their muzzles gray and their eyes full of a gentle, weary wisdom. I hired a young woman named Maya, a vet tech with a quiet competence and a love for lost causes, to help me. She lived in one of the farmhouse's spare bedrooms and quickly became less an employee and more a co-conspirator, a friend. They look so much better, Myra, Maya said one evening as we watched the horses graze in the lush pasture. That bay mare, Sadie, she wouldn't even let me touch her a month ago. All she needed was a safe place to land, I said, leaning against the fence. And a little respect. I hadn't spoken to Ethan or Claire. I heard through the grapevine of old family friends that Ethan's firm had gone through a major restructuring. Corporate speak for massive layoffs. A few weeks later, I saw a post on his LinkedIn profile, exploring new opportunities in the financial technology sector. Corporate speak for, I'm unemployed and trying not to panic. Then, the U-Haul truck appeared at the end of my driveway. It was a Saturday afternoon in early autumn. The leaves on the willows had turned a brilliant, buttery yellow. I was in the pasture, brushing Sadie's coat, when I heard the rumble of a large engine. I saw the truck, and behind it, Ethan's silver sedan. I continued brushing Sadie, my movements slow and deliberate. Let them come to me. Mom? Ethan's voice was tentative, uncertain. He and Claire stood at the fence line. They looked diminished. Ethan's expensive suit was wrinkled, his face pale and drawn. Claire's stylish clothes looked out of place against the rustic backdrop, and her face, for the first time since I'd known her, was stripped of its confident mask. She was 7 months pregnant now, and she looked utterly exhausted. "Ethan." "Claire," I said, my voice calm. I gave Sadie a final pat and walked slowly towards them. "Mom, what is all this?" Ethan gestured vaguely at the barn, the farmhouse, the sprawling land. We couldn't find you. I hired a private investigator." "Did you?" I said, a flicker of amusement crossing my mind. "I hope you didn't overpay." "How did you afford this?" Claire asked, her voice a near whisper. "The investigator said you bought it with cash." "I came into some money," I said simply. "An investment I made a long time ago finally paid out." It wasn't a lie. I had invested in that lottery ticket. "Mom, we need help," Ethan said, the words finally tumbling out of him, raw and desperate. "I lost my job. The severance ran out. We sold the apartment, but after the debts, there wasn't much left. We have nowhere to go." I looked at them. My son, who had told me to take responsibility for my circumstances. His wife, who had seen me as a nuisance. Now they stood before me, their own carefully constructed world in ruins, asking for the one thing they had so casually denied me: sanctuary. "Your mother's place?" I asked Claire. "The Willows?" "It's lovely, I hear." A flush of shame colored her pale cheeks. "Her apartment is a one-bedroom. There's no room." "I see," I said. I let the silence stretch, thick with the weight of all the things we weren't saying. I thought of the cold guest room, the 15-minute shower window, the sting of being an inconvenience. "Please, Mom," Ethan begged, his voice cracking. "Think of your grandson." I looked at Claire's rounded belly. I did think of him. I thought of the kind of world I wanted him to be born into, the kind of lessons I wanted him to learn about family, dignity, and compassion. I turned to Maya, who had been watching from the porch of the main house. "Maya," I called out, "could you please get the keys to the cottage? It seems we have some new guests." Ethan and Claire looked at each other, a flicker of hope in their eyes. Then they followed my gaze to the small, weathered cottage by the creek. "The caretaker's cottage?" Ethan asked, his voice hollow. "Yes," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It has a solid roof and running water. It's small, but it's a place to land. There are, of course, a few conditions." I unlocked the door to the cottage and pushed it open. The interior smelled of dust and disuse. A threadbare sofa sat against one wall, and a small, scarred wooden table stood in the tiny kitchenette. The linoleum on the floor was cracked in places. Claire's face was a mask of disbelief. This was a world away from her polished concrete floors and quartz countertops. "It's rustic," she said faintly. "It's a home," I corrected her gently. "If you choose to make it one." Now, for the conditions. This is a working sanctuary. Everyone contributes. The work starts at sunrise. Feeding the animals, mucking out stalls, repairing fences. Maya will show you the ropes. "Work." Ethan sputtered. "Mom, Claire is pregnant. She can't do farm labor." "Then I expect you'll have to work twice as hard, won't you?" I said, my gaze unwavering. "Rent is free. Utilities are covered. In exchange, you will provide labor. There is a small stipend for groceries, but luxuries are your own affair. No visitors without my permission. This is my property, and these are my rules. Are we clear?" They stood in the center of the cramped living room, surrounded by the ghosts of their former life, and nodded silently. They had no other choice. "Good," I said, moving towards the door. "Maya will bring you some linens and basic supplies. I suggest you start unpacking. The sun will be down in a few hours." As I walked back towards the main house, the warm, comfortable home I had built for myself, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, somber sense of balance being restored. I had not offered them revenge. I had offered them something far more difficult and far more valuable, a chance to learn the true cost of comfort and the profound dignity of earning your place in the world. The lesson was just beginning. The seasons turned at Willow Creek. Autumn's gold gave way to the quiet gray of winter, and then the vibrant, hopeful green of spring. 6 months passed. 6 months of sunrises and hard work, of silence and unspoken lessons. Ethan changed first. The physical labor stripped him of his softness, of his corporate swagger. His hands, once accustomed to a keyboard, became calloused and capable. He learned the rhythms of the animals, the language of the land. I would watch him from my kitchen window, pitching hay or mending a fence, a quiet focus on his face I hadn't seen since he was a boy building intricate Lego castles. He was rediscovering a part of himself he'd forgotten existed. Claire's transformation was slower, more internal. In the beginning, she was resentful and sullen. The cottage, with its lack of amenities, was a constant, galling reminder of how far she had fallen. But as her pregnancy advanced, something shifted. She started by organizing the sanctuary's chaotic paperwork, creating spreadsheets for feed orders and veterinary bills on an old laptop I'd given her. She found a purpose not in physical labor, which she couldn't do, but in bringing order to the business of the sanctuary. She used her sharp mind, a tool she'd previously applied to marketing campaigns and social hierarchies, to a cause greater than herself. Their son, Leo, was born on a cold, rainy night in March. The labor came early, and it was I who drove them to the hospital in my sturdy pickup truck, navigating the dark country roads with a calm I didn't know I possessed. I waited in the hospital corridor, not as an intruder, but as a necessary presence. When I held my grandson for the first time, a tiny, perfect being with Ethan's dark hair and Claire's startlingly green eyes, the last vestiges of my bitterness washed away, replaced by a fierce, protective love. They brought Leo home to the small cottage. It was cramped, cluttered with baby things, but for the first time, it looked like a home. One bright spring morning, a month after Leo was born, I was sitting on my porch, drinking coffee, when Claire approached, holding a sleeping Leo in a sling. "Myra," she said, her voice hesitant. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" I gestured to the chair beside me. She sat, her movements still weary from new motherhood. "I've been running the numbers," she said, getting straight to the point. "The sanctuary is doing well, but it could be doing better. There are grants we could apply for, community partnerships we could build. We could double our capacity in a year if we manage it right." She spoke with passion and intelligence, outlining a business plan that was both ambitious and practical. She wasn't asking for a handout, she was presenting a contribution. "This is excellent work, Claire," I said, genuinely impressed. "It's the least I can do," she said, her gaze dropping to her son. "Myra, I need to say something. What we did to you, the way we treated you, there's no excuse for it. We were selfish and cruel. We were so caught up in our own perfect life that we couldn't see the person right in front of us who needed us." Her apology was simple, unadorned, and utterly sincere. "We learn," I said softly. "If we're lucky, we learn." "I want to learn," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I want Leo to grow up knowing what family really means. Not what it looks like from the outside, but what it feels like. It feels like this." She gestured around at the sprawling green pastures, the grazing horses, the sturdy barn. "It feels safe." Just then, Ethan walked up from the barn, his face smudged with dirt, a contented exhaustion in his posture. He stopped when he saw us, a look of uncertainty on his face. "It's okay," Claire said to him. He approached the porch and stood before me, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. For everything. For what I said. For what I didn't do. I was a terrible son. I was a weak man, so afraid of losing the life I'd built that I was willing to sacrifice my own mother for it." He looked me in the eye, and I saw not the arrogant financier, but the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. "I see the man you are becoming, Ethan," I said. "And I am proud of him." His shoulders slumped in relief, and he finally let himself weep. I stood up and put my hand on his shoulder. Claire stood beside him, her hand on his back. We stood there for a long moment on the porch of the farmhouse, a broken family starting to piece itself back together, not as it was, but as something new, something stronger. The future of Willow Creek Sanctuary, and of our family, was still unwritten. Perhaps Ethan and Claire would stay in the cottage, their home now by choice and not by necessity, working alongside me to grow this place of healing. Perhaps they would eventually find their own way, build their own life again, but on a foundation of humility and gratitude this time. I didn't have the answers. But as I looked at my son, my daughter-in-law, and my new grandson, I understood that the greatest gift the lottery had given me wasn't the money. It was the chance to build a life so full of purpose and peace that I had enough to share. It had given me the power not to punish, but to heal. And in healing them, I had, finally and completely, healed myself. The story wasn't over. In fact, it felt as though it had just begun.